Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. I recently received a pretty cool idea for a video topic. One of you guys asked me, what if the clones rebelled against the Empire? What would have happened then? The reason I really like this video topic is because we constantly champion the clone troopers on this channel. The reality is these genetically altered lab-created soldiers were slaves to the Republic and their Jedi leaders. It is not something that's spoken of a lot in the mainstream lore, and perhaps it's the darker side of Star Wars that doesn't really fit the new Disney narrative, which is all about peace, love, and most importantly, consuming their rainbow unicorn feces. Now, before we begin today's episode though, about how the clones would rebel against the Republic, I want to talk about a new competition we're starting and that you might be interested in. We're looking for fans out there to help us write new episodes for Generation Tech and also Generation Films, our second channel. We're not looking for an individual with a degree or even experience or even someone with legs because, well, look at me. What we are looking for is an individual who is dedicated and very passionate about science fiction, knows how to research, write, and humor is also a plus. If you are interested in this opportunity, please send us a short message to our Facebook about yourself, your character abilities, perks, and stats. We'll then send you guys some video topics and some guidelines on how to write the script, and eventually we'll choose the best ones. The winners will have their scripts published, and we'll also give them a prize and the possibility of future work. The clones are truly one of the saddest stories in Star Wars. Forget about Padme and her broken heart, or the younglings and their bright future, or Mace Windu's housecats that are now fatherless. Forget about the sequel trilogy, which isn't even a real trilogy or coherent. Forget about the Alderaanians, the Hosnians, the Vulcans, the Floridians, and all the other people that were taken out by superweapons. The clones are the ones who deserve our empathy and our praise, and more importantly, our affection. No other military unit was designed to be more perfect and compliant than the clone troopers. They were born in test tubes and raised from the ripe age of 9 by vicious sociopathic fishhead alien scientists inside of a heavily modified Apple store. The clones are proof that nature can sometimes overcome nurture. By nature, I do mean heavily modified fet DNA, which encourages loyalty and obedience and rapid aging. Although the clones are human and they certainly have fear and other human emotions, on the battlefield they function at an entirely new level. They never hesitate or huddle behind cover longer than they need to. They rarely break mentally or lose control. Their morale remains high despite equally high casualties. Even when their leaders abandon them or lead them into disaster, the clone troopers will not complain. Well, at least not directly to their commanding officers. They're basically the perfect soldiers, and I've always said that if you give me a battalion of clone troopers, there's no fortress or high ground I wouldn't be able to take. But what does the Republic give them in return? Jedi generals and commanders that are not only incompetent, but sometimes aren't even adults yet, or about a lack of security in case a clone gets too heavily injured to fight on. But then who will help them after the war? The clone troopers will be rapidly aging, they won't have any family members to help them out, and they most likely won't have any ability to find work. Will we be able to retrain them for new jobs? Who will provide them with housing, food, and credits in case they can't find any work? Like most government bodies, the Republic was quite short-sighted, and because the clones lacked actual representation in the Senate, it was very easy to ignore their well-being. By the last year of the Clone Wars, the cracks started showing. For one, the clones had now been exposed to the outside galaxy. They were no longer just running sims every day on Kamino. Every clone had different experiences in the wider galaxy depending on where they were sent. Some saw beautiful exotic worlds that were tranquil and peaceful, others were based on the Big 000, Coruscant, and interacted daily with humans and other less sentient beings that enjoyed freedom or suffered from freedom. The point was, they were learning that there was a lot more to life than just kicking down doors and blasting holes into droids. And although it rarely happened, we did see clones defect or leave the GAR for a better life elsewhere. And no matter how well trained the clones were, the lack of R&R and reserve forces meant that every clone was overworked and almost constantly engaged in one campaign or another. But the last year of the Clone Wars, one clone even cracked and shot a Jedi officer in the middle of a battle. An examination of that clone revealed that every clone had an inhibitor chip installed in their brain. These chips were programmed with 150 emergency orders in case of a rapid and volatile political change in the Republic. Amongst those orders was Order 66, which could be enacted by the Supreme Chancellor should the Jedi Order step out of line and need to be destroyed. Although this conspiracy never spread to the wider clone army, the clones that did find out about these chips were usually pretty pissed off about it. The clones, despite their outward appearance, were unique individuals, and as the war went on, every individual clone's experiences branched out into different directions. The individual personality of these clones started to show up as well. And although many people would compare these clones to droids, the clones had something the droids did not have: agency. The inhibitor chips took away that agency, and the clones who found out about it usually felt betrayed and ultimately left the GAR. But as we mentioned, the Emperor did successfully limit the knowledge of the inhibitor chips. And we're not really sure how the clone troopers processed the mass murder of the Jedi Order. I'm sure many clones were aware of what they did, but equally confused or troubled by the sensation of these inhibitor chips taking over. But the real nail in the coffin for clone compliance would have started with the end of the Republic. You see, Emperor Palpatine saw the clones as a liability, ironically, because they had inhibitor chips in their head. There were actually several contingency orders that targeted him as well. And there was also the lack of genetic diversity amongst the clones that could be a target. It also took a lot of energy and time and money to train and grow one clone. And without a great threat like the Separatist droid army roaming around the galaxy, the Emperor looked to create a large, massive, cheap military by using Imperial citizens. The clone troopers were going to be replaced. And what happens when you have a massive amount of highly trained soldiers without any work? Well, just take a look at Iraq and what happened after we dismantled their military. Now, in Star Wars Legends lore, a small rebellion did happen on Kamino after the rise of the New Order. Well, a few years after. The Kaminoans were rightly suspicious of Emperor Palpatine and were worried that they would lose their autonomy in the new empire. They were right, and by 12 BBY, the Kaminoans finally decided to start an uprising. The Kaminoans had bred a special group of ARC troopers to fight against the Empire, but they were ultimately defeated by the 501st Stormtrooper Legion, led by Boba Fett. The thing that the Kaminoans got wrong about their uprising was that it was reactionary. By 12 BBY, the Stormtrooper Corps had grown to an immense size, and the majority of clone troopers had already been phased out of combat positions. The average clone ages twice as fast as the average human, so by 12 BBY, most clones were approaching middle age. I'd still take a clone over a Stormtrooper any day, but the point was, they no longer had a numerical advantage. A successful clone uprising would have to happen immediately after the rise of the New Order and the announcement that the clone troopers were going to get phased out. The Empire would be extremely vulnerable at the time. The clones would meet very little resistance aside from their fellow brothers, which is something that the clones would try to avoid at all costs. Say what you will about the loyalty of the clones, but there's one thing that they'll never do. During the Umbaran campaign, the clones rebelled against their senior leadership after their general purposely caused a friendly fire incident. It's very hard to get a clone to kill a fellow clone who literally is their genetic brother. The reality is, any pro-Empire clone units that encounter a rebellious clone unit will most likely be converted to the rebellion. The clones would not only control every major garrison in the galaxy, but they would also control the Republic fleet. Emperor Palpatine would have literally no manpower at his disposal, aside from maybe his personal guard, and he would be forced to flee Coruscant. If you really think about it, the clones' first directive was to defend the Republic, above all else. This would actually justify their overthrow of Palpatine's regime, which destroys the Republic. The clones would most likely avoid the political arena. They're far too practical and honest to get involved in such nonsense. And so the idea would be to reinstate the Republic, bring back power to the Senate and judicial branch, and re-establish elections for a new chancellor. The clones would have to be rewarded for their bravery and service to the Republic. The least the Senate could do would be to grant the clones access to an entire system, which they could call their new homeworld. Perhaps we could put it in the Outer Rim somewhere. And we could also give them representation in the Republic Senate. The ethics of the Kaminoan cloning program would come into question. A Senate subcommittee aided by clone leaders would seek to adjust the cloning program to become more humane. This would include removing the advanced aging process, the inhibitor chips, and also allowing these clones to have a real childhood and the freedom to decide whether they want to fight for the Republic or just pursue some other job, which is also fine. The reality is the clone troopers would still want to protect the Republic. Like a loyal dog who wants nothing more than to please their master, that part of the clone's DNA will never really disappear. At the same time, public approval for the clone troopers would be an all-time high, and the galaxy would really trust the clones to guard them. A job that they were much better suited for than the Jedi Order, whose numbers by now would have been cut down to just a handful. And so that is what I believe a clone rebellion would look like. And I'm pretty surprised that it didn't happen, but I guess Emperor Palpatine had a lot of contingencies in place to prevent a wide rebellion of his military. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.